That was amazing. Thanks to Adam and Kevin for hosting this. That was really nice. Okay, so I am Nick Holmer. I am a designer across the street. And we build web and mobile products, applications. And I work on kind of larger scale application work there. So the format of this today, we're just going to talk a little bit about micro-interactions, the components of those, a little bit of best practices for each of those components, and then we're going to talk about how we can work that into our design process as we work every day. How many designers are here? Yes, 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 yes. All right, that's awesome. Okay, so yeah, let's get into it. So this is a photo from 2007, so sorry about the quality. But this is of programmable automatic cat food dispensers. And yeah, right? And this is a photo from Jeff Atwood. Most of you are probably familiar with his work. He co-founded Stack Exchange and a lot of other stuff. He also had a couple cats. If this is from 2007, they might not be around any longer, as I'm just realizing. Oh, that's rough. I thought of that as I said the time. Yeah, okay, all right. But he had two cats, right? Yeah, old, wise cats. And he got, that really just sent things off. So he had two cats, and he bought these automatic cat food dispensers, and loved the idea of it. Like, he wasn't around, he had to feed his cats, whatever. But as you can see, things weren't so perfect. They're covered in duct tape. And that's because these cats were like running into the dispensers and knocking them over to get the food out, right? Yeah, they're just sprinting at these machines. And there's also like little cages here because they were actually putting their paws up into these dispensers and like pulling out the food. So this was nuts, right?
I am legend.
Yeah. So these are all like hacked up, and he was tolerating this product because it did what he wanted it to do. He was really happy that he could, feed his cats when he wasn't home, but it wasn't, suiting his needs until we meet this guy, and this is pretty great. This is like the newer, hotter model of the same product from the same company. I don't know, a few years later, and it looks a lot better. The food bowl is removable now, so he can clean it a little bit easier. Before, he had to pull like the whole thing up there and clean it that way. The buttons are larger. It's generally easier to program. There's a funnel shape, which actually holds a little bit more. The dispenser chute has a flap over top of it, so it prevents the paws from going up there. The top cover has like a child-proof lock now, or like a cat-proof lock. So they can't run into it to knock the food over, but it didn't matter because the base is flared and heavier now, so they can't push it over. And it's got that new hot white look too. So overall, it's awesome. It's so good that he had to write a blog post just about these cat food dispensers, right? And he's ranting and raving about all these details about it and what makes it so much better. And that's kind of like his argument there, is that your product is a collection of your details. This is the same cat food dispenser. It's just upgraded, and they paid attention to all the feedback, all the stuff that there probably had cats in there going through it and making sure that it was working the way they wanted it to. But they paid attention to all those little details, and on their own, they might not seem like that they're that important to your general concept of needing to feed these cats, programming it and stuff like that. But all added up together, it's an entirely new product, and it's amazing, and it's something that is delightful to him. It's awesome to him, instead of just being something that he tolerates and covers in duct tape to make sure that it works, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about micro-interactions. Micro-interactions are, the atomic level of interaction design. We're starting from the bottom and we're building our way up, and we're thinking about these little details of our features. Not necessarily the big primary feature that we need to develop to get out the door in time, but all those little details that's going to make up a great product. I think the way a lot of us design now is we're kind of in pursuit of those important things. We have deadlines, we have scope we need to take care of, and we kind of cast these aside. Maybe we intend to come back to them, or maybe not, but we forget about these details, and that's really what's going to build up our great product. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So getting into this very quickly, we're talking about the anatomy of a microinteraction. There's 4 primary parts. There's the trigger, which is how the user is going to initiate that action. There's the rules, and that's what's actually going to take place, the where and the whys, all of the parameters set forth in our interaction. There's the feedback, which is the system letting the user know what's happening in the interaction. They want to know that what they're doing is supposed to be happening and everything is working as normal. And then loops and modes. And those are kind of like our meta rules. These are different paths that our interaction can take depending on how we set up our rules. So let's go into triggers. Triggers are anything that the user or software does to initiate the interaction. If we're thinking about software, we're probably going to think first about buttons or links, stuff like that, what the user is going to tap to get everything going. But it can also be like push notifications on your phone. There's tons of notifications that you're getting all the time that are trying to trigger you into using your app. Other integrations with other apps. And they can also be audible triggers, like if anyone uses Siri or Amazon Echo. Those are all audible triggers to get you to go into an interaction. So what we're thinking about when we're working on our triggers is make them obvious and engaging. The user should know exactly what's going to happen. If you want them to enter into this interaction, they need to know what exactly they're getting themselves into because they don't want to waste time. And we also want to try to bring our data forward. Use that data to entice the user and give them a preview of what they're about to get into. So the examples I have up here, first is Facebook notifications. So the path that our user usually takes for Facebook is they get a push notification or they have a badge on their icon, and they're going to launch the app, and they're going to check on notifications. And they're going to see what that notification was, and that might be relevant to them, might not. And usually they're just going to jump right out. But Facebook started adding in more context and more triggers. So you can also see like what birthdays are going on, friends' life events. I blur that out. That's somebody entering a relationship, so I work with them. I didn't want to embarrass them. And then there's news stuff too. So what's great about this is Facebook is anticipating that user path. They're going to open it up. They're going to see that notification originally, and they'll probably leave the app. But now there's a variety of triggers to keep them engaged, and the likelihood that a user is going to stay in that app and stay engaged is so much higher. And they'll probably end up spending a half hour on Facebook and wondering what's going on with their life. And then the other one is Yahoo Fantasy Football app. This is an example of bringing that data forward. Instead of just telling me that there's a score alert, they're going to tell me that Peyton Manning scored the touchdown, and they're going to show me the score of my matchup. So I'm intrigued. I want to see what's going on. For me, I'm usually losing, so I want to see if I have any hope of reclaiming this. So I'm much more likely to enter into this interaction because I've seen enough data to know that things are intriguing to me. Okay, rules. Rules are everything that's going to happen after the user takes the bait and initiates the interaction from that trigger. These are all the parameters of what's going to happen after they take the action. It could also be if there's no action, what happens elsewhere. Rules can determine how the interaction responds to the trigger, what's going to happen when you press that button, all those sorts of interactions, different states. What control the user has over that process. Are they able to cancel that action once they start? Are they able to make any changes? Things like that. The sequence and timing of the events. What happens, step 1, step 2, step 3, and how long this whole interaction is going to take. What data is being used. Any geolocation dependencies, weather, time of day, stuff like that. If we think about our GPS, how they switch to a night mode, that's sort of what I'm talking about there. How often it might repeat, which is more about loops that we'll talk about in a second. And what happens when the interaction ends? We don't want to leave the user with nothing to do after we finish our interaction. Where are we going to take them? What's going to be the path that they have after that? So what we're thinking about with rules is we want to build toward user goals. We want to figure out what's most important to them, and we want to use that as our engine that drives all the rules in our interaction. And goals are not necessarily tasks that they achieve. A goal is not to log into a website. A goal might be more of, I want a seamless shopping experience, so I want to log in as quickly and without any headaches, or as quickly as possible without any headaches. So if we work toward that, that's how we might focus the rules of our micro-interaction. Verbs and nouns, that's something to think about. We write it in a format like writing out a sentence, where verbs are the actions that a user can engage in, and nouns are the objects that enable them to work. So if I'm raising the volume of a slider, from an application, that's sort of like the verb and the noun that we're talking about, raising the volume with a slider. So more best practices, if we want to limit our users' actions, we want to try to get them from A to B without much trouble and keep them on a focused path to completion. The more opportunity we give them to stray off our path, the less likely it is that we're going to have that great interaction that we're looking for. Also, use state changes instead of advancing the user to another screen. If we need to confirm something, like change the state of the button, allow them to confirm that right on that same button. Reuse your interface components instead of taking them to another screen and just making it more complicated than it needs to be. And finally, don't start from zero. This is a concept where you use your data to create meaningful, smart default states. Ask what you know about the user or the context in which they're performing that action. So if we know a little bit about the user, serve them up something that's relevant to them instead of just starting them from zero. And kind of what I'm talking about here, these are both cards from Google Now. The one on the left is Walgreens, and as a user approaches Walgreens, we're going to serve them up this card, and it's going to be a QR code to use their rewards card because we're using that data. We're close to a Walgreens. We know this is probably a smart choice, so it's very likely that they might be using this. And the same for this traffic indicator. If I'm about ready to go to work or if I'm about ready to go home, we're going to serve you up this card, and we're going to tell you how much time it's going to take to get home because that's relevant to me at that time. So we're building toward the goal, and we're using that data to give them some smart rules. Moving on to feedback. Feedback helps users understand how the rules of your interaction are supposed to work. It's like a system status of when things are going right or when they're going wrong. As a user, if I tap that button and the rules start going, I want to know that everything is happening as it's supposed to be. Even if it's not correct, I know that what I did was what I'm supposed to do. And this feedback can be obvious or subtle. It can be in your face with a big error message. It can be very subtle with a little state change on a UI component. We're thinking of visual things probably by default, but it can also be audible feedback. If we use our Facebook app and we have the sound on and we pull to refresh, there's that little snap that lets you know that everything's working as it's supposed to. Other times, if there's no internet connection or something, you may not hear that snap. So that is feedback that lets you know that things are supposed to be happening the way they are. And there's also haptic feedback, vibrations. If anyone has ever played PlayStation in the last 5-10 years, rumble packs is good haptic feedback that letting you know that something crazy is happening in your game. So how we want to approach feedback. Feedback is for people. They're system statuses, but it's read by people. So present it in a way that they will understand. Use natural language. Try explaining it to your grandma. If that's not going to work out, then you know you need a little bit of work on how that feedback is going. And it should be driven by need. Only show it's absolutely necessary. Don't give them feedback on a system status that's not relevant to them or they can't take any action on. It's just really going to kind of confuse them. And again, I talked about this earlier, but reuse your UI elements. Here we have Dropbox, and this is their progress bar for uploading a file. And they have several elements just on this progress bar. They have the file name, they have how long it's going to take, they have the option to cancel, and they have the file size, all in just that one space. They could have had those all over the place, but that would have been cluttered and confusing, and it's just a great use of reusing your components. And then finally, we can deliver brand personality to our users. Probably a lot of people have used Slack or know of it, and they take every opportunity when there's feedback from the system to give you a little bit of their brand personality, their humor, their quirkiness. So it's not like I'm looking at the fact that my app isn't loading. I'm having fun because I'm reading what the newest thing is that they've said for me. Okay, so finally, loops and modes. Loops and modes are the additional paths that our interaction can take sort of optionally. These are straying from the normal rules that we've set in place. First, modes. So they stray from the normal rules of your interaction, and they bring you to a different setup. So if we're thinking of a weather app, normally I wake up, I check the weather, it's local to me, and that's what I do. However, if I'm like going on vacation or something and I want to check out a different city, that's going to be a different mode. I'm going to pop into settings and I'm going to switch cities. So that's different from what I would normally use it from, so we call that a mode, and we keep that separate. A loop, on the other hand, is a cycle of your interaction that repeats. So once you get to the end of your interaction, if you want to start it over from the beginning, any number of times, infinitely, if you want, that's what a loop is. So an example would be my alarm app. I have a rule set up that every morning I wake up at 7:30 because I work in an awesome place, and I can get there at like 9:30. However, if I were to switch jobs and I have to wake up at 8:30, then I'd change that rule. But until I change that, it's going to happen every morning. And then finally, we have long loops. And long loops are loops that learn from your interaction and your data over an extended period of time, and they adjust to these things. And I'll give you an example of that here. So this is Spotify Discover Weekly, and that's the idea of a long loop that's recognizing our behavior over time. Every week, it's serving me up a new playlist, but each week, it's taking that data of what I've listened to and what I'm responding to, and it's giving me customized content. And people are raving about this because it's this infinite long loop where it's always getting better and it's always getting more customized to me. So I jumped ahead of that, but some of the best practices that we're looking at for modes is to use modes very sparingly, if at all. So as we're thinking back to this weather app, if I'm switching to another city, that's something that's out of the ordinary. And if I'm not really used to an interface like this, I might accidentally switch cities and I'm not sure how to get back. So the more instances that you introduce where it's possible to just change the normal rules of this interaction, the higher the likelihood that you're going to run into some problems there. So we try to use those infrequently. And then place them in a separate area, like I said, so we're not cluttering up that interface and adding on to the instances of maybe an accidental tap. One final part on loops I want to talk about. They can also be used to adjust your interface over time. So if we're thinking about the way a user would use an app for the first time, maybe we give them an overview and we give them some tooltips and helpers because they're using that for the first time. But as you go through those loops and they start to become more of an advanced power user, we can start to remove those things, make it easier for them to get to what they need to get to. Maybe there's like a big label on your buttons that you can start to remove over time because these users are becoming power users and they don't need all that extra help any longer. Okay, awesome. So just for a minute, I want to talk about design process. So it's kind of difficult to account for all these details when we're thinking about like our scope, how we estimate projects. I know I never think about these things because it's kind of like built into how we work. It's expected that we consider all these details. But if we're trying to build something new into our process, it only comes from repetition. It's just like sports or anything else. You need to get that practice in. So what I've been kind of doing in my process when I'm thinking about scope and estimation is baking in these details as like my own personal mental line item. So maybe it takes a couple extra hours, but I'm remembering that I need to attack these things every time I work on a feature. So how you might be able to do this outside of scope and estimation is to kind of think about how you would apply each component to whatever feature you're working on. Key in on the ways that you can specifically improve each part. Think about what your trigger is in that interaction, how you might improve that, the rules of feedback, the loops and modes, so on. And then finally, think about things other than the ideal state. That's something that catches, I think, a lot of designers, especially Dynamic for sure, is we estimate out what it's going to look like ideally, but we don't think about all the other states, like empty states, what happens before they take that first interaction. Partial states. I know we've all kind of probably worked on an account screen with that big, beautiful circle avatar photo and all the data is put in perfectly. But what happens when the user doesn't upload a photo or doesn't enter any other information except for what's absolutely necessary to create an account? What is our account screen going to look like then? And how can we entice our users to finish up that data? And then error states. How can we make those a little bit more elegant? How can we not make the user feel like they're doing something wrong? And how can we prevent those error states from happening in the first place? Try to think about those rules in different situations like that. So that's it, guys. You can hang out and talk to me on Twitter and Dribbble. I'm both at Nick Holmer. And then if anyone's going to CodeMash this year, I'm going to be speaking there on how to write better copy for your interfaces. So if you want to check me out there, you can. Otherwise, questions or whatever you want.
Maybe time for 1 or 2 questions.
1 or 2 questions.
The looping and ingrained, the habit forming, and we're used to buttons being in specific places is something which is taken advantage of by nefarious situations where they move the button, or they reverse the logic so that they want you to click on the thing. So, you know.
Talking about LinkedIn? They do that all.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the question?
Have you observed there is taking advantage of that looping, and people are looking for wherever they feel there's the ruts in the road where people are going through an app or here's a standard. Now can we take advantage of that in a nefarious way?
In a nefarious way? Geez, I'm not sure how to answer.
As the example of moving your buttons, like the yes is always on the left versus the no is on the right, and it switches around so people automatically hit the green no.
So we're talking about just kind of learning what people are doing and kind of switching our behaviors to kind of meet our goals? Is that sort of the question? Yeah, so I wouldn't do it in an evil way. I brought up LinkedIn as a joke, but they do that all the time. Like it's awful. So to do it in a positive way, I'd probably just observe those interactions, just test with people, start to learn what people are doing, and start to make A/B tests, start testing out different methods and sort of observing that behavior.
How about instead of a nefarious way, using it as a means to keep your site to be fresh and new, is not in a totally distracted way, but change it subtly.
If we're talking about adjusting what people are used to doing,
Ruts in the road that people are so used to that they can do it blindly. Like my car drives to work on its own. I don't know how it gets there. That would be a loop.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not touch that. If
You wouldn't touch that?
using that same example, if I can drive blindly to work, I would not mess that up. That's a good thing. If people can use your app flawlessly and without thinking about it, it's much more likely that they're just going to pop it open without thinking, the way we all open like Twitter or Facebook, and they're just going to check something, they'll pop out 10 seconds, but they'll do that like 10, 20 times a day because there's no thought involved. The more that you make the user second guess, even if you're like making something fresh, it's not, I wouldn't say that it's exactly exciting to them. I'd say that it's like, oh, I have to relearn something. And the way that people act on the internet or through mobile devices, it's just like, I don't want to learn anything. Like, I don't want to think about it. The less that I have to do with that, like, the more likely it is that I am to return. So I would advise against that because you want to try to build behaviors and you want to try to make it easier for people to do that, build that muscle memory so they pop back into your app and use it more and more and more. Yes?
There could be a point where you have too many micro-interactions.
Yeah, quite possibly.
That article that passed around a lot of weeks ago, you're not a Disney animation thing.
Yeah.
That really overdid it, but like.
I'm fully on board with that, for the record. Yeah, so there's a lot of like, what he's talking about, it's not a Disney animation or something like that. The article was referring to like the overuse of animation on sites. As you're scrolling down, like things are moving in and out and it's crazy. So I would point back to the principle of like trying to achieve the user's goal. That really does nothing for the most part. People are overusing it. If it's to serve a purpose, sure, that's great. But there absolutely can be too much of an interaction, a micro interaction. Yeah, so I mean, I would say just like use common sense. Just point it back to your goal. I would find that goal early on. I'd write it and stick it on the wall. And if you're having arguments with your development team or the rest of the project team, like, hey, we need to add in this animation because it's going to look awesome, we can point objectively to this rule and say, like, is this helping the user achieve their goal? And odds are it's probably not. So it might be easier to skip it, or it might be easier to win that argument because it can get kind of heated, I know, when you have that project team and someone is so passionate about adding in this little feature, and you're like, well, I'm not sure that really achieves our goal. So it becomes less about you saying no to their idea and more to like that objective goal setting. We're done?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks so much, guys.